Hi, everybody. It is Carolina Rides time. We're going to do something a little bit different this particular episode. We're going to go a little bit more in depth with something. If you are familiar with what we air on WSPA TV, and even if you're not, I'll go ahead and explain it right now. We've got something we run seasonally called Weather Weeks. There's one for every season. We do one for the holidays too. Stories that have something to do with weather and how it affects certain things or certain people. Well, we did a story, or in fact, more specifically, I did a story that ran on Monday, April 13th concerning the effects of weather on NASCAR and racing. Obviously, one of the things you think about is, well, rain affecting the track, right? And in fact, most oval courses, that means everything comes to a dead stop. Well, there are more effects than that when it comes to weather, when it comes to NASCAR. And what we're going to be doing this particular show is I'm going to be running the expanded interview we did with Greg Ives, who works for Hendrick Motorsports. He has been a crew chief for them for some time now. We're going to be talking to him about all the different elements when it comes to a car's performance that are affected when we see weather changes, particularly when we start seeing temperature changes. Here we go, and we are going to take you right now to my interview with Greg on the campus of Hendrick Motorsports outside of Charlotte.
When I first started here at Hendrick Motorsports in 2004, I was a post-race mechanic and kind of worked my way up to different levels from setup plate to engineering, crew chief, and now kind of a mentorship program for me now over the O'Reilly program, over young engineers, developing them, and just ultimately there for whatever projects Mr. H needs me for, and just utilize my experience and background to make those things happen.
What are some of the drivers who you've worked with over your time at Hendrick?
Started out with Jimmy Johnson as a race engineer, moved to Regan Smith and Chase Elliott in the Nationwide Series at the time, and then eventually came back to Hendrick Motorsports with Dale Jr., Alex Bowman, when the substitute drivers of Jeff Gordon, Alex, and Noah were in the car. So got to work with a lot of different drivers of different ages and experience level, but all of them really helped me grow to where I'm at today.
Now, working with crew chiefs and engineers, obviously you have to work with changing conditions, with all sorts of different things during the course of a race. And of course, what we're focusing on is how the atmosphere, weather conditions can change. People think rain, the race will stop and we'll wait for everything to pass on by. But what a lot of people don't know is you get those other changes during the course of the race. Temperatures are up or down for whatever reason, and that can have an impact on how the cars perform. Let's talk a little bit about that. First, tire adhesion. Temperatures can have an effect on that.
Yeah, most definitely, like you said, weather is always changing. You can look at a week out, and by the time you come to Sunday, it's changing. But with the Goodyear Eagles that we run, tire temp is very important. And what's very important about that is generally the drivers will talk about the tire overheating, and that's really just one of those things where track temp is very important in that. So general scenario is if the sky cover is sunny and it's 80 degrees, usually we calculate about 30-degree hotter track temp. So you're talking about 110 to 115 degree track temp, which is relatively hot. So the tires can only get up to probably about 300 degrees before they start losing the potential grip that they have in the tire. The cooler you can keep them, the better the grip they have. But that operating temp is kind of where you want to keep that tire, and there's not a whole lot of cooling that we can contribute and give to the tire because it'll take away from the aerodynamic effect. Track temp, whether the sky cover is cloudy, definitely is really more favorable for the tire, but as the sun comes out, those tires go up. Usually lap time goes down, and driver probably complains a little bit more about the balance of the race car being tight, being loose.
Are there things you can do other than slap on a new set of tires to adjust for that during a race?
Yeah, ultimately it comes down to the balance of the car. If your right rear is getting hot and starting to get really free with the car, you can go into the back window and you can either take wedge out of the car with the right rear or wedge round wedge out of the right rear, or you can put the wedge in the left rear. So, that's adding more weight to the left rear, taking it off the right rear, maybe relieving that right rear tire a little bit of the heat and tightening the car up a little bit. So you can do that. You can do it with air pressure. As the tire gets hotter, you're getting more build in the tire, and eventually starting with lower air pressure will help keep that tire in the range of pressure it wants to be. Eventually the tire temp will come down a little bit and survive and help that tire live a little bit longer. So from that side of things, that's probably the biggest thing. Even when you set the pressures of the tires, whether you have them in the sun or you have them in the shade, changes the build within the tire. So there's a lot of behind the scenes things that happen before you slap the tire on, but all in the same goal is to reduce heat in the tire, reduce tire build, and keep that grip as long as possible.
Now, with also changes in temperatures, colder air means the air is more dense, hotter air, it's less dense. That can have an effect on the engine performance and the aerodynamics of a car. Let's start with the aerodynamics. What are some of the things you've got to watch out for?
Well, you really don't have to watch out for too much other than, it typically can shift the balance of the car a little bit. If you have more dense air, your nose is typically the first one that sees it, so you can kind of pin the nose a little bit more, add a little bit more front grip. So tendency to be able to run maybe a little bit tighter race car when you have those cooler scenarios. One, you're probably going a little bit faster. You probably have a little bit more drag, so you're kind of carrying a little bit more speed into the corner from the standpoint of being able to have that grip. So it's your dynamic between straightaway, it's probably just a tick lower, but corner speed's probably a tick higher. And it's asking more of the car and the driver at that point. As far as a cooler weather, typically, a wind can come into factor as well with that. And the direction of the wind, if it's pushing you into the corner, it can have a tendency to free the balance up, or if you have a headwind getting into the corner, it can kind of slow you down and make you have to drive in differently. So those type of scenarios, from a cooler aspect or a change in wind direction can definitely have effect on the aerodynamics.
Over the course of a race, obviously you can have changing conditions, especially if it's a race that starts late in the afternoon, goes to the evening, temperatures change. Are there adjustments that you have to make to a car aerodynamically at any point in there during a race?
Yeah, it's really difficult to change much aerodynamically throughout the race, other than, like I was talking about, you can change the pitch of the car with rounds in or out of the rear. That can give you a different aero percentage. So that's probably the major changes you can do aerodynamically during the race. There was ways in the past that you would utilize pit crew members to make adjustments to the car, and NASCAR was not very happy with that. So ultimately we got away from those type of adjustments. NASCAR is doing a great job of watching us, but yeah, from an aerodynamics standpoint, once you start the race, you're kind of where you're at, other than maybe making some pitch adjustments. On these cars, you're not allowed to put tape on the grill anymore. O'Reilly Series, you can put tape on the grill. As it cools down, you can put the tape on the grill. That maybe adds some more front downforce and or maybe pull some tape. And those are really the major ways you can adjust the aerodynamics of the car throughout a race.
Coming up here in a little bit, we'll actually go over there and you can show us kind of where around wheels and whatever, where some of those things you might do, things to the car are. Also, engine performance. As temperatures change, how does that affect what you're dealing with in terms of air-fuel mixture, in terms of just whatever the temperatures do, and how that affects the performance of the engine?
Yeah, definitely the engine really likes cooler air. That's usually the cooler air comes with a higher air density, which means the engine wants more fuel. When you put more fuel, it just, it's just a lot more horsepower when you can run a richer mixture into the engine. So, on the NASCAR Cup side of things, they have EFI to be able to adjust for that, and it automatically sets to a lambda that the engine tuners really want it. So as it gets cooler, as the air density goes up, that EFI system's putting more fuel into it. Ultimately, that means worse fuel mileage. So there's some calculations and understanding that you have to go through there. But engine always loves cooler temperatures, wants to be able to run cooler. On the Cup car, we control the engine temperature with what they call a perf plate. So you can run different size holes to be able to cool the engine or heat the engine differently. And ultimately, like I said, you want to be able to run cooler temperatures, but the tighter the perf plate or less opening you can have, the better aerodynamically the car is. So there's a fine balance between that, between a 60-degree day versus an 80-degree day. 80-degree day, you're going to have less downforce. You're going to have a hotter engine, so you got to open the perf plate and ultimately continuously take away performance from the race car. Overall, that affects what the driver has to say and maybe has them pushing the radio button a little bit more.
Yeah, how do you go ahead and do that during the course of a race to make those adjustments if you've got the temperatures changing 20 degrees from the start of the race to the end of a race?
Yeah, it's really tough on the Cup side of things. We're not able to add grill tape to be able to adjust those temperatures. So ultimately, you kind of have to, you're fighting a battle of when and where. You don't want to be too hot early in the race, and as it cools down, you don't want to be too cool. So you have to maybe sacrifice one or the other, or have a sacrifice on both ends. And usually that's what happens, is they try to maybe run a little hot early in the race when everybody's trying to set a pace and try to just understand where their cars are at, yes, it's still a race, but execute that first part of the race properly. And then towards the end of the race, you want the car as optimal as you possibly can. So most of the time, you're setting up for the end of the race from an engine standpoint as far as temperatures, as well as from an aerodynamic standpoint. So you're trying to make that understanding best as you can throughout that changing weather condition.
And something you also mentioned too, obviously this has a lot to do with fuel strategy, and especially toward the end of the race, that becomes really important as those temperatures are changing.
Yeah, for sure. And as the temperature is cooling down, like I talked about before, the engine performance is starting to go up. You're having to add a lot more fuel to the engine because of the air density getting better. And then your fuel mileage starts going down. So at the start of the race, you may be able to go 1 to 2 laps further than you can at the end of the race. And that's, there's several occasions where guys have ran out of fuel maybe one lap to even one corner away from getting that victory at the Charlotte 600. So it's ever calculating, ever changing. History is very important in all that. History of not only the race and the fuel mileage throughout the race, but also the weather condition that it started at and ended at. So, there's sky cover that can affect the start of that race that could keep the track temp low, that could keep the air temp low. But as the night goes on, the clouds burn off, and all of a sudden you get sun about midway. So it's ever changing, and you're ever adjusting. Sometimes the weather doesn't get the credit it deserves in these scenarios, but it definitely can play havoc, on a strategy.
Yeah, it's just how hard is that to go ahead and come up with, okay, we can get this amount of miles, we're toward the end of the race, it's going to be close, and making that decision.
Yeah, it's, usually when, in the past when you really just had scale, some, your little handheld calculator and some random sketches of numbers, that was a little bit more difficult. Technology has gotten way better than a pen and paper and just a little banker calculator. And we have simulation tools that allow us to kind of see somewhat of a live ECU fuel burn throughout a lap. As you can document that each lap and understand, okay, I burned 0.3 of a gallon that lap, I burned 0.4 that lap. What do I need to make it to the end? I need to only burn a quarter of a gallon per lap, so you you can kind of curb your driver to what you need to burn to get to the end of the race. Sometimes, in a race, you want to be the first one there, so lap time is very important. But when it comes to a fuel mileage race, lap time has to be maintained, it has to be consistent, and sometimes doesn't have to be the fastest. So those are the things that you have to adjust and change. And weather, like I said, is really important in that. As you lose tire grip, you may have to press the throttle down a little bit more on the straightaway. If you gain that tire grip, you're able to carry that center corner speed and maybe run only partial throttle on the straightaway. So it's really a big effect on that fuel strategy standpoint, and ultimately, like I said, what the engine wants to burn.
Who is basically the staff weather person? Who's in charge of keeping track of all of that? And if conditions are changing, if you get even 5 minutes notice that there's going to be, hey, we're going to have this cooler air that's about to come in from a storm that's 10 miles away, how do you get the jump on that?
Well, in a funny side of things, everybody's the weatherman, right? So, but in all reality, we do have race engineers that are taking care of that within a controlled environment. Controlled environment is the best place to watch the weather. I'm not sure, because when you're outside, you can see if it's sunny, if it's raining, and all that. But like you said, studying the weather is very important on what is coming, what is real, what is the changing of the wind direction, and that can change throughout a race. So we generally have a race engineer that's in our command center, looking at that weather, looking how it's coming in, understanding what is real weather and what is not real weather, and then ultimately, like I said, when you're at the racetrack and you see the wind, the flags blowing a different way, or you see a cloud coming in, and it could be as simple as just looking up and seeing what the cloud pattern, sky cover is coming in, and is it going to cover that sun for your qualifying lap, or is it not?
We will be back with more with Greg Ives coming up on Carolina Rides. All right, what we're going to do now is we're going to take a look at one of these cars. We're going to kind of go along and show us the different things that can be changed, that can't be changed, that can be changed for the O'Reilly series, and to go ahead and make an adjustment to the changing weather conditions.
So earlier I was talking about engine performance and how cooler temperatures or hotter temperatures affect the engine. So right here, this is the grill. It's obviously not open, but on the Cup car, this cannot be adjusted during the race. On the O'Reilly car, you can add pieces of tape, and what that eventually does is closes the opening. It can only take in so much air, and then the engine temp either goes up to where you want it, it adds some front downforce, and changes the O'Reilly car. On the Cup car, you're not allowed to do that. It's controlled internally, but the air that goes in here as it cools the engine down or heats the engine up, depending on which way it's going, is the air is going in the intake or the grill, and then it's coming out, passing the radiator, and it's coming out these louvers. These louvers, have hot air coming out of there, and that kind of goes around the car. Some of that air goes into that little duct that's up there by the Chevy symbol and Bowman. That heats up the cockpit. That also heats up the driver and changes, how he's feeling inside the car. So a lot of varying respects to the grill intake is a very important area of the car. Not only on the O'Reilly car, but the Cup car.
What is the reason that the rules are different in those two series?
So the reason why on the Cup side of things, because of the louvers and the change of the way that the air is passing through and being relieved, there is some aerodynamic benefit from the Cup side of things to have these louvers open and the air coming, rather than going underneath the car like the O'Reilly program, it's coming out of the car. So you're not creating high or low pressure on the hood that causes issues and has aerodynamic effects. Also, the Cup car has an under tray that goes from the start to the end. So trying to trap all that air inside the car and not letting it escape is definitely not good for performance. Also not good for the driver to be having 220 to 260 degree air staying under the hood, heating up the cockpit, and having that issue. So there's multiple reasons. Those are kind of the three that I hit. Just way it's designed, underfloor, capturing all the air under the car and potentially heating the driver up.
Okay. Let's work our way along and show us any other points of adjustment you might make, whether it's because of changes in aerodynamics or changes in the tires.
Yeah, as far as the tires go, there's definitely some changes to the inflation pressure that we go into right there. These tires are designed to work within a certain operating temp of approximately 300 degrees is kind of the ballpark of where you want them to live. They do get hotter than that. They do get cooler than that depending on what corner of the car that tire is on. Usually the left front is the lightest loaded, the right rear is probably the heaviest loaded. So you have to run different air pressures on right side to left side, front to rear, to be able to manage those temperatures and also the pressures at which they live. As the air temp goes up and the cloud cover is sunny, track temp goes up with that approximately 30 to 40 degrees. That makes the tire hotter. When that makes the tire hotter, has less grip. Ultimately, the build goes higher. You want to start lower on air pressure. So you're kind of chasing that tire temp of that tire. And then you're also chasing the limitations of it. Tire failure generally comes from either running over something and having a puncture, or your pressure's too low and you're on the edge of reliability. So everybody runs on the edge, and the tire and the temp at which you put the pressure in it is very important.
Is it easier or harder, or does it make a difference to make adjustments if it's a road course?
I would say it's all the adjustments are hard, right? So, but generally, the road course is probably more easy because you generally run similar front pressures and similar rear pressures, but they are different. So, where on an oval you're trying to manage 4 different air pressures, on a road course you're trying to manage basically 2. You may split left to right just a tick, but not often. You're really working on front turn versus rear drive at a road course.
Okay. What else we got as we work along?
As you work along, obviously, we do have the cockpit area, and that's where the driver's at. Like we talked about, we have the windshield duct that feeds cool air. They always like the 60-degree days because it cools down the air in the cockpit and gives that driver the relief he needs. As you come to the rear, these are the quarter windows. This does not have a NACA, but usually it has some type of air inlet. And what's the importance of that? Well, we have a transaxle that sits behind here that has gear fluid in it, and you have to maintain a gear temp of a certain, it's specified on what they give us. So you have to have enough air to cool the gear fluid, and sometimes you have to have one NACA, sometimes you have one on each side. So that's really important to keep the driveline department happy and keep the temps cool. Hotter day, you gotta have more opening. Cooler day, you can close it down. And ultimately, the more you can close it down, the better it is aerodynamically.
And as you mentioned earlier, aerodynamically, you've got that NASCAR template you've got to stick with, so you can't start making changes because it's going to be hot today. Let's do something here.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of NASCAR, cloud cover really affects these race cars from a tech standpoint, not just from performance on the racetrack. If you go to, let's say we're going to the next race and you're there in the pits and you see all your crew members that have umbrellas and they carry the umbrellas, you're like, why? It's not going to rain. Why do you have an umbrella? Well, these body panels are affected so much by the sun, and as they get hotter, they expand. As they get cooler, they compress. So even the Lexan on the windows, the body parts. So if this body panel, if this is on the limit of being too far out, and you add sun to it, and it comes further out, and NASCAR sees that in their scan, eventually they can fail you for that, and you have to go around and make adjustments. So,
Wow.
having the umbrella there, providing shade, is definitely very important to get your car through tech and also be right on the edge of the limit that
I was
you
not
want.
aware of that. How tight are those tolerances?
The tolerances are really tight. We are plus or minus 100 thousandths to 150 thousandths, depending on a Riley series or the Cup series. So it's really tight.
To put that into perspective, how, in terms of then how tight those tolerances are, how much do the body panels actually change?
They can change upwards of 15 to 20 thousandths. So you know, if you're shooting for 125 to 130 thousandths and it shifts 20 thousandths, now you're out of specs. So you know, the glass has different parameters than the body panels, different than the underwing. So heat can change. You know, if it's a hot day, you kind of have to buy yourself a little bit more tolerance. If it's a cool day, you can buy yourself a little more tolerance, and it's all different. You know, this body panel could be too far out. The deck lid could be too high up. There's all different areas that aren't the same, and you strategically have your body panels in the proper location and proper dimension.
Pretty cool stuff right there.
Yeah.
Greg, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And if you would like to catch the full story, you can find it on our website at WSPA.com. It's called Spring Weather Week, Racing the Elements. You will find the video with the shorter version of the story, but we also talk a little bit with the folks at Charlotte Motor Speedway concerning the track drawing equipment and that sort of thing. I would like to give my thanks to all the folks at Hendrick Motorsports who helped us out with this, and for the main part of the story that's on our website with folks at Charlotte Motor Speedway as well. Thanks for joining us for Carolina Rides. See you next time. Drive safely.